It is Wednesday, April 8th, and I wanted to, as promised, record another video to introduce you all to our second ethnography of the term called Pathologies of Power, Health, Human Rights, and the New War on the Poor by Paul Farmer. Um, I am not sure how many of you have heard of Paul Farmer. I would imagine more of you have heard of Paul Farmer than have heard of Dr. Sufrin, who wrote our last book. But for those of you that haven't, or for those of you that have but need a little refresher, um, Paul Farmer is arguably one of the leaders of global health work and public health work in across the world. So he has training as both a medical anthropologist and as a medical doctor. And through his career, he's done absolutely wonderful things for improving the lives of millions across the world, primarily those that have been or are living in dire poverty. But one thing that he has done is he has formed an organization called Partners in Health. And Partners in Health, they work primarily in Haiti, in Russia. I'm trying to think of what other countries they are primarily in, but what they spend a lot of time doing is working with tuberculosis patients and trying to get cures that we have for tuberculosis into the right hands. So you'll see that a lot of the writing that Paul Farmer, or a lot of the case studies, it kind of goes from his work from Partners in Health, has helped him to craft numerous books, this being one of my favorites. So this book, Pathologies of Power, talks, I would say in a sentence, if you were to, describe the main point, he talks about healthcare as being a human right and not a privilege. So just think about that sentence. Healthcare is a human right and not something that only the privileged should have access to. And it's beautifully written. It will take us around the world. But for tomorrow, for Thursday, I just want you to read the first 50 pages. So just the foreword, the preface to this new edition, and then the introduction. So, and I don't want you to skimp and just dive right into chapter 1. So, Amartya Sen actually writes the foreword, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but he is from India originally. He's both an economist and a philosopher, and he has gotten the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in welfare economics. So what that is it's a branch of economics that seeks to evaluate economic policies in terms of their effects on the well-being of community. So he's very much well-being minded. You'll see that Farmer quotes him a lot throughout the book. I think yes, I thought I saw a quote for a second, but he's quoted throughout the book, and he's the one who writes the foreword. So please read that, and then you'll move on and you will read the preface to the 2005 edition, and that just gives you a lot of context for what's to come. Most of this book is stories that Paul Farmer tells, lots of firsthand accounts of health disparities that it will be a quick read and a good read, but I want you to read about the preface, or read the preface. It talks about, gives you some context about Haiti, what it's like, kind of why he's using that as the case study. So then you will scoot on to the introduction, and in the introduction, you will learn about a term, and maybe it's new to you, maybe it isn't. But Paul Farmer was the scholar to originally coin something called structural violence. And let me see if you're getting, yeah, he introduces it in the introduction. And essentially, think about structural violence as being things that almost seem natural to us in society now, but that they negatively impact the poor more than anyone else, and it kind of keeps the cycle of poverty going because of these structural inequalities. So I like to look at the example of, bail. And if you get arrested, let's say there's two people, one has a lot of access to wealth and money and one doesn't. You're arrested for the same exact crime. You don't have trial for, let's say, another year because of our jail system and how often, it takes so long. This, or let's say this person, the person who has more wealth and more resources, can pay the bail and wait for trial, not behind bars, not so much with the other person. That's an example of what he means when he says structural inequalities, things that are keeping somebody down, so to speak, and furthering health disparities because of these institutions and because of these structures that are set up. Now, those can be within a country or a state. They can also be really global. So if you look at the world, and you'll read about this, but we have access to medicines against tuberculosis, an infectious respiratory disease, or virus. If I or you were to get that, the likelihood that we can recover, is quite high. The drugs aren't that expensive. But Paul Farmer asked the question in this book, why, if we are so savvy with innovation and technology, are so many millions of people dying from tuberculosis and, these largely preventable diseases? And that's what he talks about, pathologies of power, right? So the war on the poor being these structural inequities, being health not being taken seriously as a human right. Um, and and I think that it will allow us to look at the health disparities that we've studied so far from a more global perspective. I've taught this book before, used it to teach in global health classes, so I think you guys really will enjoy it, especially those of you that are taking a more global focus on your health report. One thing I will really encourage you to do, you'll see that this entire chunk of the back of the book are notes, so footnotes. So much information is packed into these footnotes. So I'd really encourage you, as you're reading through, read the footnotes along with the chapters. You'll learn so much more than if you just skip over them and try to get to the end. So also, if you want to, on your discussion boards, talk about things you learned in the footnotes, goodness, by all means. For some extra stuff, I won't post it today. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I will at the end of the week post a video about Partners in Health, the organization that Paul Farmer has started. It's now a global organization that helps those in poverty have better access to care. And I'll also include an article just for your reading pleasure. You don't have to read this, but about structural violence and that term. And, if you want to unpack it a little bit more theoretically, if that sounds exciting to you, you can read that article. But those two things are just extra. I just want you guys to sit down on your couches and, make some tea and read this book. Again, you only have to get to page 50 for our discussion tomorrow. So, and I'm just realizing chapter 1, he talks a lot more on structural violence. So I might have gotten a little bit ahead of myself, but it really is the premise for the whole book. So it's good that we talked about it a little bit today. So if you look on D2L for the discussion tomorrow, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of me asking you questions to answer, because this is just a lot of new content, I want you to choose a passage from the reading that stood out to you. So from, up until page 50, and post the passage. It can be a sentence. It can be a little longer. Please note the page number, and then tell your group, tell me, tell Lori, why was it interesting to you? Did that highlight a health disparity that we've already been talking about? Did you learn something new that you didn't know prior to reading this book? Did something give you a new perspective, a way of thinking about health, healthcare, and health disparities that maybe you haven't thought of? Maybe you just got really confused by a passage. Totally fine. I get confused all the time when reading new things. So if something didn't make sense, then, write that down. But I think that'll be a nice way to get us started on this book and get us talking to one another in our groups. And at the end there, you'll see, so do that, highlight the passage, tell us why you chose it, and then ask a question to your group. And I think that'll really get us going with our discussion tomorrow. So I hope you enjoy the book. again, you're only reading the introduction, so this is a little hard for me because I don't want to spoil anything, but that's sort of where he's coming from. Again, healthcare as a human right, and I think you'll be shocked by a lot of the things that you read in this. I mean, though, one great thing to keep in mind is that Paul Farmer has done so much work to reduce these inequities, and a lot has happened that's been really positive since this book was written in 2005. So a lot of things, though, still remain similar, so it's good to go back and read this. Anyway, I'm going to sign off. Quick reminder, a lot of your classmates are sending in current health disparity presentations, so please pop onto TechSmith Relay and watch those, listen to those. And if you have questions, let me know. And I look forward to reading everybody's discussion on our first bit of Pathologies of Power tomorrow. All right, take care, everybody.